My son's house in San Diego was a palace of glass and silences. On that Thanksgiving night, the heat from the oven seemed not to reach the dining room, where the air was always cold, like the heart of my daughter-in-law, Sophia. The table, long and bountiful, shone with a perfection that frightened me. Every plate, every piece of silver cutlery, seemed to have been placed to remind me that I did not belong there. I was an old, worn-out object in a modern exhibition hall, a piece out of place. The laughter sounded rehearsed, and I felt like a spectator at a play about a happy family that was not mine. My son, Javier, was the king of that castle. At 45, he wore success like armor. The expensive fabric of his suit, the gleam of the watch on his wrist, everything screamed how far he had come. But when his eyes, the same brown eyes I had kissed so many nights, passed over me, there was no warmth. There was only a contained impatience, a weariness. I saw the boy I raised disappear under the layers of a man I barely recognized, a stranger who gave me shelter, but not a home. He smiled at the guests, but to me, his face was a mask of harsh obligation. I sat in the chair assigned to me, trying to take up as little space as possible. My dress, the best I had, seemed like a rag next to Sophia's shimmering silk. At 72, my shoulders were hunched, not just from age, but from the constant effort of not being a nuisance. My hands, which had once held Javier's little hands so firmly, now trembled in my lap. I hid them under the napkin, ashamed of their protruding veins and stained skin. My greatest fear was to spill a glass, to stain the tablecloth, to give Sophia one more reason to look at me with that icy contempt. The conversation flowed around me, about subjects I didn't understand. Stocks, trips to places whose names I could barely pronounce. I ate slowly, the food tasteless in my mouth, the knot of anxiety in my stomach tightening with each passing minute. Suddenly, Sophia's voice, sharp and deliberate, cut through the monotony. "How funny," she said, the alarm in her voice sounding completely false to my ears. "My ring, the diamond ring Javier gave me. It's gone." The silence that followed was immediate and heavy, like a shroud falling over the table. My heart began to beat erratically. I knew with the certainty that years of humiliation had given me that this storm was brewing for me. Sophia's gaze met mine across the table, and she didn't need to say my name. The accusation was there, in her cruel, victorious eyes. "It was on my finger this morning. The only one who walks around the house during the day, touching things," she said, the venomous insinuation hanging in the air. All faces turned to me. I felt the heat of shame rise to my cheeks, a fire burning within. I didn't," I tried to say, but my voice was a thread, broken by surprise and dread. My hands were now shaking uncontrollably. I looked at Javier, my son, my only son, seeking a safe harbor in him, a defender. I searched his face for any sign that he would defend me, that he knew my heart. But what I found was a mask of irritation. He didn't see his mother. He saw a problem, a shameful scene that needed to be contained quickly so his perfect party could continue. Hope died within me at that moment. I saw my son stand up, his chair scraping violently. His voice, when he shouted, was that of a stranger. "You've always been a burden. You ruined my life," he yelled, and each word was a physical blow. The accusations echoed the complaints I had heard Sophia whisper to him for years. My sacrifice, the nights I worked 2 jobs to pay for his college, the back pain I carry to this day, everything was erased by his fury. To him, I was nothing but a source of shame. I tried to stand, reaching out to him in a last, desperate plea to reach the boy I loved. "Javier, please," I whispered. It was then that he grabbed my arm. His hand was so strong, his fingers digging into my fragile skin. And then, he pushed me. The world spun, and the only thing I felt was the air leaving my lungs as my body hit the floor. It wasn't the pain of the fall that hurt me, but the crushing humiliation of being there, fallen at my own son's feet. From the floor, I saw everything as if underwater. The legs of the furniture, the expensive shoes of the guests, the shocked faces of my grandchildren, who looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. I raised my eyes to Javier, who stared down at me, his face contorted with a cold rage. And then he pronounced my sentence with a terrible calm that was worse than his screams. "It's decided. Tomorrow you go to a nursing home." The words sounded like the closing of a tomb door. The next morning, I packed my small bag in silence. Every piece of clothing I folded seemed to weigh a ton. Javier waited at the door without saying a word. The purple bruises on my arm were the only physical reminder of the previous night, but the wounds in my soul were much deeper. He left me in front of a gray building with a smell of sadness and bleach. He didn't hug me. He didn't say goodbye. He just handed me the bag, got into his luxury car, and drove away without looking back. I stood on the sidewalk, watching his car disappear in the distance, taking with it the last spark of hope I still held. The world seemed to have lost its color. I was Elena, a 72-year-old woman, a teacher who had dedicated her life to caring for others, and now I was alone, abandoned by the only man for whom I would have given my life without a second's hesitation. I had become a burden, and I was discarded. The door of the nursing home opened, and a nurse with a tired smile called my name. I took a deep breath, the cold morning air filling my lungs, and took the first step into my new life, or rather, into what was left of it. The image of my son's face, hardened by anger, was the only thing I could see, engraved in my mind like an epitaph for the love that once existed. As I walked down the sterile hallway, a question echoed in my mind, a question I knew would haunt me for all my remaining days. How could a mother's love generate so much hatred? I didn't have the answer. The only thing I had was a small suitcase, an aching body, and a heart that had been completely and irremediably broken by my own son. My first days at the San Diego Public Nursing Home merged into a gray haze of confusion and pain. I was taken to a room I would share with another lady, whose gaze was permanently lost on some distant point in the past. The smell of disinfectant and cabbage soup seemed to have soaked into the yellowed walls. There was a small, barred window that overlooked a concrete patio. From the sterile opulence of my son's house to the functional poverty of this place, the fall had been brutal. I would lie on the narrow bed, the thin mattress under my aching body, and feel the loneliness swallow me whole. The routine was a prison in itself. Waking up at 6 in the morning to the shrill sound of a bell, bland breakfast at 7, pills in a small paper cup at 8, empty hours spent in a common room where the television was always on, tuned to a loud show that no one really watched. The subtle contempt of some staff members, who treated us like stubborn children, was a daily humiliation. I, who had spent my entire life caring for and teaching others, was now treated as an object to be cleaned, fed, and medicated. My body began to give way to the weight of my sorrow. The chronic pain in my back, an old companion from my years of hard work, worsened to the point of making me cry at night. I lost my appetite, and the few clothes I had brought with me began to hang loose on my frail frame. Depression was not a passing cloud. It was a dark, deep pit into which I sank further with each day that passed without a word, a phone call, any sign that my son remembered I existed. Abandonment was an illness consuming my body and my spirit. I watched the other residents, each with her own story of loss etched into the wrinkles of her face. Some received visitors on weekends, and their faces would light up with a joy that caused a sharp pain in my chest. Others, like me, spent their days waiting for someone who never came. We were the congregation of the forgotten, a silent sisterhood united by the same wound. We shared the silence, the vacant stares, the mutual understanding that our time of importance in the world was over. I began to take refuge in my memories. They were my only shelter, my only possession. I remembered Javier as a boy, a skinny little kid with perpetually scraped knees and a smile that could light up the darkest day. He loved to draw. He would spend hours on the floor of our small living room, colored pencils scattered around him, drawing houses, buildings, entire cities. "One day, Mommy," he told me once, with the seriousness of an 8-year-old, "I'm going to build the most beautiful, house in the world for you. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. His eyes shone with a promise, a love so pure and unconditional that the memory now felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I kept that drawing, a colorful scribble of a house with a giant garden, for years. Where was it now? Probably thrown in the trash, along with all the other memories of the past that my son had made a point of erasing. The boy who promised me a castle was the same man who threw me in a cell. Life wasn't always easy. When my husband passed away, Javier was only 15. The grief was overwhelming, but the need to survive was even greater. I was left alone to raise our son on my modest teacher's salary. I worked all day at the school, and at night, I graded papers until my eyes burned. Everything I did was for him, to ensure he had the opportunities I never had, that the loss of his father would not limit his future. When he was accepted into one of the best and most expensive architecture schools in the country, my heart swelled with pride. But the pride was accompanied by panic. The cost was $85,000, an astronomical, impossible sum for me. That night, I sat in the kitchen of our small house, the house where I grew up, and made the most difficult decision of my life. The only valuable asset I owned were those walls full of memories. I sold my childhood home without hesitation. Every dollar from the sale went to Javier's education. To protect his pride, I told him it was money from an inheritance I had saved. I saw him cry with joy, hugging me tightly, promising he would make every penny worth it. Seeing him so happy made the pain of losing my home worthwhile. I handed him his dream, even if it meant giving up my only safe harbor in the world. With the money from the house going to his college, I needed more to support us. That's when I got a second job. From 7 at night until 1 in the morning, I cleaned the offices of a commercial building. Downtown. I scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, cleaned bathrooms. I would get home in the dead of night, my body aching and the smell of cleaning products on my clothes. I slept only 4 hours before getting up to teach. Javier never knew. I hid my exhaustion behind smiles and cups of coffee. When he asked why I seemed so tired, I said it was the stress from school. The pain in my back started then, a constant reminder of the weight I carried, both physically and metaphorically. But every time he showed me a project, a model, every time he received an award at the university, the pain lessened. My sacrifice was transforming into his success. On his graduation day, I cried more than anyone in the audience. There he was, my boy, now a man, receiving his degree with honors. He was brilliant, talented, and the world was at his feet. I felt a pride so immense I thought my heart would burst. In that moment, every sleepless night, every aching muscle, it was all worth it. He had made it. We had made it. It was also when he met Sophia. She was beautiful, ambitious, and came from a wealthy family. From the beginning, she looked at me with a certain condescension. I was the poor, simple mother of her genius boyfriend. I tried to like her for Javier's sake, but I always felt a coldness in her presence, an invisible barrier she erected between us. She saw my love as a weakness and my history as a shame to be hidden. When they married, the distance between Javier and me grew. The calls became rarer, the visits shorter. Sophia always had an excuse. After I retired and my money ran out, the only solution was to live with them. I was received not as a mother, but as an obligation. I became the old woman, the burden, the constant presence preventing them from living their perfect life. The humiliations were subtle at first. Comments about my clothes, impatient glances when I took a moment to understand something, conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. Javier, influenced by his wife, began to see me through her eyes. The successful architect didn't want to be reminded of his humble origins, and I was the living embodiment of those origins. It was around that time I started writing the letters. They were letters to Javier that I never had the courage to deliver. I wrote about my pride, my longing for the boy he once was, my pain in seeing him transform into a stranger. I told the truth about the house, about the cleaning jobs, about the sacrifice. Each word was a tear shed on paper. I kept them all in a small wooden chest that had belonged to my mother. Now, lying in this nursing home bed, those letters are like ghosts. The truth is locked away in that chest, in a house where I am no longer welcome. The truth about my love, a love that built the foundation of his life, and that he now despises. What was the point of so much sacrifice, if this was the result? To be pushed to the floor and abandoned in a place like this? The irony was painful. The boy who promised to build me a beautiful house was the same one who took my home away twice. First, my childhood home, which I sold for him. Then, the small space I occupied in his life, which he denied me out of shame. The pain was an ocean, and I was drowning in it, with no strength to swim to the surface. The days turned into weeks. The outside world ceased to exist. My universe was reduced to that room, the barred window, and the memories that haunted me. Hope, once a stubborn flame in my chest, began to flicker out, leaving only the cold ashes of resignation. I was dying slowly, not of old age, but of a broken heart. Sometimes, during the night, when the pain in my back kept me awake, I would look at the moon through the bars and talk to my late husband. "Would you see him?" I would ask the silence. "Would you recognize the man our son has become?" I didn't have the answer, and that uncertainty was perhaps the most painful part of all. The contempt in Javier's eyes that Thanksgiving night was a reflection of my failure. I had failed to raise a man who valued love over money, compassion over ambition. Or perhaps I hadn't failed. Perhaps the world had broken him. Perhaps Sophia had poisoned him. Or perhaps, and this was the hardest truth to swallow, he simply never loved me the way I loved him. And so the days passed, each one the same as the last. The bell, the pills, the loud television, the silence. I became one of the shadows in the hallways of the nursing home, an untold story, a forgotten sacrifice. I was Elena, Javier's mother, and my existence had been reduced to a silent wait for the end. Weeks after leaving my mother at the nursing home, Sophia started pressuring me to clear out the storage unit where we kept the few belongings she had brought to our house. "It's a useless expense, Javier. We need that space," she said, with her usual cutting practicality. I agreed without much thought. It was just another administrative task, another loose thread from my old life that I needed to sever. I went to the storage unit on a Saturday morning, expecting to get it all done in under an hour. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and forgotten things. Amidst boxes of old books and some worn-out furniture, I found a small, dark wooden chest. It was old, and the metal latch was rusted. My first instinct was to throw it out with the rest. It was just another piece of sentimental junk. But something stopped me. I vaguely remembered that chest in the corner of my mother's room, always closed. Driven by an impulse I couldn't explain, I forced the latch with a screwdriver. It opened with a dry crack. What I saw inside made my heart stop for a moment. It wasn't old photographs or trinkets. It was dozens of bundles of letters, tied with faded satin ribbons. They were all addressed to me, in my mother's careful, slightly trembling handwriting. Beneath them was a folder of yellowed documents. A shiver ran down my spine. With suddenly trembling hands, I picked up the folder. The first document I saw was the deed of sale for my childhood home. The date on the document hit me like a punch to the gut. June 2000. Exactly 2 months before I started college. The sale price was there, in clear, undeniable figures. $85,000. I remembered her perfectly, handing me a check for that exact amount, telling me it was an inheritance from my grandfather that she had saved for my studies. The lie, so innocent at the time, now revealed itself in its full, painful dimension. The foundation upon which I had built my success began to crumble in that instant. With my heart pounding in my chest, I opened the first letter. My mother's voice, a voice I hadn't truly heard in years, leaped from the page. She spoke of her pride, her fear, her infinite hope for my future. And then, she confessed, "My son, I had to sell our little house. There was no other way. But don't you worry, my love. Home isn't made of bricks, but of dreams. And your dream is my home now." I fell to my knees on the cold storage unit floor, the air knocked out of me, the weight of that revelation crushing me. I read letter after letter, each one revealing a deeper layer of her sacrifice. I found out about the second job, cleaning offices at night. She described the bone-deep weariness, the back pain that made her groan in the dark, the cold of the early mornings waiting for the bus to come home. And in every letter, she reaffirmed her love, saying it was all worth it to see me happy, to see me fulfill my potential. I, who had accused her of never doing anything for me, was, in fact, the sole reason for everything she did. I drove home like an automaton, the chest of letters on the passenger seat beside me like a coffin. I found Sophia in the garden, planning a new landscape design. Without a word, I threw the letters on the table in front of her. "Did you know about this?" I asked, my voice hoarse, broken. She glanced at one of the letters with disdain, a condescending smile on her lips. "Oh, Javier, so dramatic. Mothers make sacrifices. It was her obligation. It doesn't change anything." In that moment, the spell was broken. I looked at my wife, at my immaculate house, at my successful life, and I felt an overwhelming disgust. It was all a sham, built on the tired body and calloused hands of the woman I had humiliated and abandoned. Sophia's indifference wasn't just towards my mother. It was towards me, towards any genuine human feeling. She was the architect of my monstrosity, and I had been a willing apprentice. The image of Thanksgiving night flooded my mind with the force of a tidal wave. The sound of her body hitting the floor, the look of terror and confusion on her face, my cruel words echoing in my ears, the sight of her, alone, with a small suitcase at the door of that depressing nursing home. Every memory was a stab to my newly awakened conscience. I couldn't breathe. I ran out of the house, got in the car, and drove, blinded by tears, in the only direction that mattered. Guilt was a living creature inside me, tearing me apart. Every mile I drove towards the nursing home felt like an eternity. I had called her a burden, when in reality, I had been her burden my entire life. I prided myself on being a self-made man, but the truth was, I was made. I was built by the unconditional love and silent sacrifice of my mother, and I had repaid her with the deepest cruelty. When I arrived at the nursing home, the smell of disinfectant and despair hit me full force. I ran to the reception, my heart in my throat. When I asked to see Elena, the nurse looked me up and down with obvious contempt. "Mrs. Elena is not receiving visitors," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "She refuses to see you." The words hit me with the force of a steel door slamming in my face. It was too late. I had destroyed her, but I didn't leave. I couldn't. I deserved that rejection. And so much more. I went to the hallway of her room and sat on the floor, my back against the wall, facing her closed door. I could hear the muffled sound of a television from inside. I took the letters from my coat, and, my voice choked with sobs, I began to read them aloud. "Dear Javier, today you called to tell me about your first perfect grade," I read, hoping my voice would travel through the wood. I spent 3 days in that hallway. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. I just sat there, reading, her words to her, one by one, baptizing each sentence with my tears. The nurses would walk past me, shaking their heads with a mixture of pity and anger. I was the prodigal son who had returned too late, a pathetic spectacle of regret. Outside, a storm began, the rain beating against the windows as if the sky were weeping with me. On the night of the third day, exhausted and with no strength left, I crawled to her door and knelt. I pressed my forehead against the cold wood, the rain serving as the soundtrack to my despair. "Mom," I whispered, the words scratching my throat. "Forgive me. Please forgive me. I know everything now. I was blind. I was a monster. I would trade all my success, every penny, just to have your love back. Please, Mom." The sound of the rain was the only answer. The silence inside the room was absolute. And then, when all hope had abandoned me, I heard it. A soft sound, almost imperceptible. The sound of a lock turning. The door opened slowly, revealing my mother. She looked as if she had aged 10 years in a few weeks. Her eyes were sunken, but in them, I didn't see the hatred I deserved. I saw only an infinite sadness. She didn't say a word. She just raised her trembling hand and touched my tear-stained face. That touch, a gesture I hadn't felt since childhood, was the forgiveness I didn't deserve, the beginning of my redemption. That touch of her hand on my face was the end of one world and the beginning of another. Carefully, I helped her up, my hands supporting her fragile back, and guided her into her room. The space was small, impersonal, and sad. I sat her on the edge of the bed and, not knowing what to say, I knelt before her again, simply holding her hand. There were no words that could heal the wounds I had opened, so I remained silent, letting my presence be the beginning of my penance and my plea for forgiveness. For the first time in decades, I wasn't performing, wasn't managing a situation. I was just being a son. The next day, I began the process of getting her out of that place. The bureaucracy was a maze of forms and waiting, and the contemptuous looks from the nursing home staff were constant. But for the first time, the opinions of others didn't affect me. There was a clarity in my purpose that shielded me from the outside world. Every signature, every fee paid, was a step away from the monster I had become. I wasn't taking her back to my old house. That house was a mausoleum of a false life. I was taking her to a new beginning, to a real home. The conversation with Sophia was brief and final. I returned to our mansion, which now seemed cold and vulgar, and began to pack my bags. When she realized what I was doing, she started screaming, threatening me with lawyers and financial ruin. I listened to her in silence, and when she finished, I said with a calm I didn't know I possessed, "You can have everything. The house, the cars. I don't care. I'm taking my mother back." The look of shock and fury on her face was the final confirmation that I was leaving a prison, not a marriage. I rented a small, modest house in a quiet neighborhood with a small garden out back. It had only 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, and a living room where the afternoon sun streamed in. As I unpacked our few belongings, I felt a peace that none of my material achievements had ever provided. I was trading a showcase of success for a sanctuary of truth. This was where my mother and I would rebuild, not just our relationship, but ourselves. The first few weeks were painfully delicate. My mother barely spoke. She moved through the house like a ghost, the trauma still visible in her frightened gaze. I didn't force conversation. Instead, I dedicated myself to caring for her. I cooked her favorite foods, read aloud from the books she loved, and helped her walk in the garden every day. The role reversal was complete and necessary. I, who had for so long been the center of her universe, now made her the center of mine. Taking her to doctors and physical therapists became our new routine. Her physical recovery was slow, but every small progress was a monumental victory. One day, while we were tending the roses in the garden, she smiled. Not a weak, sad smile, but a genuine one that reached her eyes. That evening, for the first time, she asked about my day. These small miracles were the bricks with which we were rebuilding our bridge, a bridge I had dynamited with such carelessness. While she healed, I dismantled my old life. I sold the luxury watch, the sports car, the stocks. The divorce was finalized, and though I lost a fortune, I felt richer than ever. The wealth I had sought was a mirage, a desert that nearly cost me my soul. True wealth was right there, in the kitchen, helping me chop vegetables for dinner, her quiet presence filling the void that money could never fill. One evening, sitting on the porch, she finally spoke about the past. She told me about the lonely nights in our old house after she sold it, about the weight of her secret. She didn't accuse me. She just narrated her story. I listened, absorbing every word, letting her pain become mine. When she finished, I looked into her eyes and said the most important words of my life. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Forgive me for not seeing, for not valuing you. Forgive me for everything." The tears we cried together that night washed away the last shadows between us. It was then that the idea was born. With the money I had left, I didn't want to start a new business. I wanted to build a legacy, her legacy. Mom, what if we used this money to help other people like you? I proposed. We could create a foundation to help elderly people who have been abandoned. We'll call it the Elena's Sacrifice Foundation. For the first time in years, I saw a glint of purpose in her eyes, the flame of the teacher, the caregiver, rekindling from the ashes. I dedicated my passion and my knowledge to a new project. I began to design not a skyscraper for a billionaire client, but a community center for the elderly. A welcoming place, full of light, with therapeutic gardens and activity rooms. A place that would be free of charge. My architecture, which had become a tool of vanity, was transformed into an instrument of service. I was no longer building monuments to ego, but shelters for dignity. My mother dove into the project with me. Her life experience was more valuable than any market research. She gave her opinion on the height of the handrails, the type of flooring to prevent falls, the activities that could bring joy. She, who had been silenced and made invisible, now had a powerful voice, a voice that was shaping a better future for others. She was no longer a victim of her story. She was the hero. We started the foundation's work before the building was even finished. We visited nursing homes, offering legal support, companionship, and resources to those who had no one. Every person we helped was a way of honoring my mother. In every lonely face, I saw her face, and in every small act of kindness, I found a piece of my own redemption. I was finally building something that truly mattered. The opening day of the Elena Community Center was one of the happiest days of my life. The ceremony was simple, surrounded by friends and the first members of our new community. My mother, wearing a vibrant blue dress, cut the opening ribbon. Her hands no longer trembled. She gave a brief speech, talking about the importance of second chances and the power of compassion. Her face radiated a strength and serenity I thought were lost forever. Now, our life is calm. The evenings are filled not with tense business dinners, but with card games and quiet conversation. Sitting in the garden of our small house, watching the sunset, I often hold her hand, feeling the calloused texture of a life of work and sacrifice. I lost a fortune, a wife, and a prestigious career, but I found my mother, and in finding her, I found myself. The true measure of a man is not in what he builds for himself, but in how he rebuilds what he has broken. 5 years later, the Elena Community Center is a beating heart in the city. On a sunny afternoon, my mother, now 77, but with the vitality of a young woman, sits in a circle of neighborhood children, reading a story with animated intonation. Her laughter echoes through the garden, a sound that is the soundtrack to my peace. I watch her from a distance, next to the memorial I built in honor of her sacrifice. Our foundation has now helped hundreds of elderly people, creating a support network that ensures no one is left behind as she was. The cycle of pain I perpetuated has been broken and replaced by a cycle of care and love. The boy who promised to build a house for his mother finally kept his promise. Not a house of bricks, but a home for hundreds of hearts.